As Ukraine continues to advance into Kursk, Putin looks to have fewer and fewer options to respond. Just what are the consequences of each of his choices, and why are none of them all that great? I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. Let's talk about it. Okay, so first, there's been a wide range of reporting on what is happening in this region. And there's a gazillion different maps actually trying to explain what's happening. You can see Rybar here showing, again, a pretty limited advance, but a fairly large number of conflicts. And what I think this is sort of one of the more interesting stories emerging here is that for the first time in this war, we're seeing, not for the first time, but really for the first time in probably about a year and a half or 2 years, we're seeing maneuver warfare. We're seeing units ranging far farther than the official lines of control indicate, right? As you can see here, there's some indications again that Russian military forces are attempting to reinforce their positions, but are being hit with things like HIMARS and ATACMS. You're seeing reports of clashes up to 35 kilometers from the front line. You can see literally even Nisa is where we're seeing some reported clashes. So this, to me, is indicative of a conflict that, or an operation that is much more maneuver heavy. We're seeing purportedly small armored groups conducting raids, actually disrupting Russia's ability to bring columns of reinforcements to the main front line. This is so unusual to see, and I think it's a really indicative of the fact that Russia, one, wasn't really prioritizing the defense of its own border, and two, that it may be short of key defensive systems, particularly things like air defense systems. Now, as we've talked about, this is still a far cry from a full-on threat to the Russian state, right? Ukraine is while there's apparently several battalions involved in this fight, it's still a long way from being something that's like an existential threat to Russia. But we're going to talk about the options that Putin has to respond, and he's really backed into a corner here. At least, I shouldn't say that. That's a little bit overstating it. But he is stuck with only kind of bad options in front of him. Now, before we talk about that, of course, if you have some need to get things done and are feeling a little bit squeezed, you don't have to invade your neighbor's house. Instead, maybe you just need a little bit of a caffeine boost. You should check out Strike Gum. Strike Gum Energy has 90 milligrams of caffeine in every single piece. This one piece of gum contains as much caffeine as a Red Bull or an Amp Energy, but zero sugar. And it's made in the USA, obviously veteran owned, inspired by my time in Afghanistan when I had to carry around energy drinks. And once you've had one lukewarm energy drink while on patrol, man, you really commit yourself to finding a better way. That's what Strike Gum is. So if you're looking for the energy drink alternative that's not going to cost you $5 a day at a gas station, Strike Gum's the way to go. Definitely want to check out the 5-pack. Right, that's going to be, I think, your best deal. You throw a pack in your glove box, a pack in your gym bag, in your office, and keep one at home, and you're always going to have the energy you need. So I'm going to link to that in the description at strikegum.com. Okay, let's talk about the COAs, the courses of action in front of Putin. And these are things that, again, the Institute for the Study of War is trying to preserve Ukraine's OPSEC, their operational security. And so they're not being that explicit with what they assess Ukraine is doing, what their objectives are. And to be clear, I'm not part of I don't have any special access to information. So I'm just some guy. That's why I don't really feel bad speculating on this, because honestly, anything I say, the Kremlin has already had somebody make that assessment. So course of action one that Putin has available to him is to use the existing conscripts. We've talked about this in other videos. Russia has a conscription system. All able-bodied men are supposed to serve for a certain period of time in the Russian military, though many upper-class and middle-class Russian men simply find ways out of it. But a lot of Russians do serve in the military, and they are constrained, though, because they cannot serve overseas. They can only serve in domestic combat zones. Again, for exactly this kind of reason. If Russia were to be invaded, Russia wants to have a large army of conscripts trained and available. Right. And so that's who's been resisting the Ukrainian advance right now. And by most accounts, these conscripts don't want to be here. They're largely surrendering en masse. They're training. You have to remember, because they aren't going to fight in Ukraine, training them, equipping them is the very, very last priority for Russia. So they stick them in these kind of border roles where they were really confident Ukraine would not try to push into them. But that seems to have changed. So Putin may say, listen, use your conscripts, use their FSB border guards, right? Their border patrol, the Russian National Guard, Rosguardia, and other kind of irregular forces already on the international border to try to push Ukrainian forces back and defend against Ukraine in Kursk. Here's the problem. As discussed, because these aren't forces that are fighting in Ukraine actively, their equipment and organization and training is the lowest possible priority. And in some ways, the troops here are probably even worse off, because any troop that has even an inkling of motivation to fight in Ukraine is fighting in Ukraine. So Rosguardia troops, probably the only exception is the rumors that some Wagner troops ended up getting stationed with the Rosguardia. So you may see some Wagner fighters sort of scattered throughout this, but I think they're likely surrounded by Russians with very, very low motivation. And frankly, this is basically keep doing what you've been doing, which has gone really badly. Now, there's some rumors that, of course, Chechen units are reportedly operating in Kursk Oblast. Prominently, a Chechen commander publicly said, the Ukrainians must have bypassed all our guys. They must have driven right past us, because none of us have abandoned our positions. No Chechen force have abandoned their positions. Again, arguing that the enemy must have driven right past us is not the flex you think it is. Again, if you are the badass super Chechens, you have to go and meet the enemy. That's how this works. You cannot defend yourself by simply building a bunker and sitting inside the bunker. All that does is sit there and go, we know this bunker's safe. We're securing this bunker. Meanwhile, again, columns of Ukrainian troops apparently driving by these Chechen positions. So, again, elite Chechen forces operating exactly as they always are. And then, of course, there are reports that what they're calling irregular forces or formations of like the DNR are all kind of are deployed along the front line. There's supposedly even VDV elements. All of this kind of smells, again, when you've got like DNR divisions and some VDV folks, that makes me think that depleted units might be rotated into this Kursk border guard role as part of kind of a R&R or a reconstitution, right? You get rotated to Kursk, you sit in these defensive positions, you don't move, you're not really under attack, and so they sit there and they get fresh conscripts, they get some new equipment, they have time to train, and then they get rotated back into Ukraine. So again, they might be going up against very depleted units. They might be going up against units, again, that were depleted and are being reinforced with low motivation contract soldiers. Right? Let's see. And ISW thinks Russian military may chase down the COA if it thinks that lower quality forces that would be likely to be less well equipped could stop Ukrainian forces. Again, that are successfully employing innovative tactics and equipment. So again, what we're seeing is, though, this is a really like keep doing what you've been doing essentially, and throw some of your worst troops at some of Ukraine's best. Probably not going great. Right? The second option, but this is an option, right? Second one, Russian command uses existing northern group of forces along the Russo-Ukrainian border to respond to this incursion. Russian northern grouping of forces. These are the guys who are fighting in places like Kursk, Bryansk, Belgorod, and are the ones who were attempting to, I think, also take Kharkiv, right? Transferred some of these to Kharkiv as part of that Kharkiv offensive, but it's not sure if they're still sort of fighting there, if they're pinned there, how many what percentage of this northern grouping of forces were in this attack. But the key thing to take away from this, again, is that this would involve, again, pulling folks out of Russian troops out of Vovchansk to shore up the border in Kharkiv. And the problem that Russia now has is that now, for a long time, they simply, the thing that they thought was defending their border was the fact that Ukraine didn't really have territorial ambitions for Russia, right? That it didn't really want to seize any Russian territory. And this is proven to be not a viable strategy. That Ukraine is absolutely willing to seize border territory, that doing so really is going to enable them to improve their negotiating position vis-a-vis the Russia when it comes time to start trading back territory. Again, every square mile that Ukraine controls of Russia is a square mile that they can exchange, essentially like a prisoner exchange, for territory when it's time to negotiate. So for Russia, they now have to sit there and go, it's not enough to just contain this Kursk Oblast incident, because if they were to rob, let's say, Voron of its personnel and shore them up, or pull them out of Vovchansk and shore them up over here, the problem is there's now a lot of Ukrainian units sitting in Vovchansk, and there is no administrative barrier stopping them from pushing into Shebkino, right? So, or Belgorod proper. And so Russia now sits there and goes, okay, well, this option, it would involve robbing Peter to pay Paul a little bit, right? And while it's possible, right, to kind of reinforce one to thin out the other, it may stretch them actually too thin, right? It's not a bad option, but it's going to involve, again, costs in terms of thinning out other areas that the Russian military wants to keep Ukrainians locked in place, namely Vovchansk, right? Now, this is COA 3. The Russian military may choose to deploy operational reserves that it accumulated for the summer offensive and relatively more combat-effective frontline units to Kursk. This is probably the scenario that Ukraine would find most beneficial. This is to take their units here fighting in and around Turetsk, in and around Ocheretina and Pokrovsk, and pull them off the front line and divert them to contain this breach in Kursk. This would, of course, relieve a lot of pressure on Ukrainian troops in this area. Interestingly enough, let's see if I can pull this up here. You also have some reports, actually. Let's see. Yeah. In New York, this was 2 days ago, you've actually seen Ukrainian troops actually reverse Russian gains a little bit, right? Working backwards in time. You can see that, again, we're talking about a highly localized counterattack here. But you could see that, again, a limited amount of Russian gains are already starting to be rolled back in New York. And we're just seeing, this is one of the few updates, right, as of August 8th, where Ukrainian forces haven't actually reported that many losses, or territorial losses, rather. Now, you could see here that, again, backing up sort of 2 clicks ago, you could see that Russian forces continuing their campaign of kind of gradual expansion of this breakthrough in and around Avdiivka in New York. And again, it's not a game changer, but this is the Russian summer offensive. And so this would put an early end to Russia's summer offensive, effectively. So that is not great either. Final one, maintain the forces it's currently committed to Kursk, but use aviation and strike elements, so things like cruise missiles, to improve Russia's ability to degrade the Ukrainian attacks and possibly retake Kursk. This is probably one of the more dangerous options because Russian aviation is still in operation, but there's a lot of reports that Ukrainian aviation is able to operate pretty freely in the area, and that Russia was caught flat-footed without air defenses. And that's why you saw Ukrainian fixed-wing aviation, helicopters able to actually get pretty close to the front line, provide true, proper close air support. And Russia may in turn deploy its own forces, but Ukraine is a little better prepared and purportedly has its own air defenses active in and around Kursk, right? You can see here there's some reports of, again, Ukrainian forces shooting down Shaheds. So it's likely that there's still Patriot missile batteries kind of operating in and around here, trying to keep the skies free of Russian aviation. So this may not be as decisive as Russia hopes it'll be. And again, it's going to mean pulling Russian aviation away from their primary offensive goal. So there's one other option that I want to discuss that I'm surprised nobody else is talking about, and that is the fact that under current Russian policy, they are allowed to use nuclear weapons to defend Russian sovereign territory. Now, I know what you're thinking. First, you're saying nuclear weapons, Russian sovereign territory, but isn't technically Donetsk and Luhansk Oblast now considered sovereign Russian territory? This is true, but it's only Russian territory when it's convenient for Russia, and using nuclear weapons would be a bridge too far. Russia depends on allies like China, and they want to see this conflict be contained. And if they were to pull that off, it would be seen as probably a bridge too far, even by Russian standards. So for Putin, he's sitting there and saying, okay, well, could I use a tactical nuke to break up this situation? The answer is possibly, but here's kind of the larger problem, is that if large-scale munitions like thermobaric rockets, right, or the Russian fab bombs, if they aren't sufficient to dislodge Ukrainian troops, then a tactical nuclear device won't be either. And there's a bunch of problems with nukes that make them really good as strategic weapons and not so great as tactical weapons. The first is, let's say, right, let's see if we can pull this up here, actually. Okay. Right. So here is the contested town of Sudza. Let's pull it up here. We got it right here. Here we go. So here's some of the Ukrainian liberated areas, but there's reportedly Sudza. Okay. So here's a nice little nuclear strike simulator. Right. Now, what's the tonnage or the yield of a tactical nuke, right? Yield of tactical nuclear weapons is around 50 kilotons. Okay, so let's say we were to pull this up and say 50 kilotons. All right, calculate and put it right there. Okay, so let's say you were to drop it here. All right, let's say you were to put a 50 kiloton weapon right on Sudza. And you would have, of course, a fireball. You would have a ionizing radiation, and then a standard blast, a heavy blast radius of about 1.5 psi, and then a moderate blast radius. Okay, so let's see. Then it would have a thermal radiation limits. You'd have third-degree burns up to 3 kilometers out. And then, of course, you have a radius of a light. This is a light explosion. So why do I pull this up? Because what would this achieve, right? So yes, you would eliminate all Ukrainian and all Russian forces here in this zone. That's kind of a problem, right? For Russia, because you're eliminating the Ukrainian offensive, you're also eliminating most of your troops. There's also a more complicated problem. You're eliminating the town of Sudza, the thing you're defending. This is the problem. Whatever you do, it has to be worth it to drop that kind of weapon system onto your own territory. And for Putin, he'll have to go to his people and say, listen, you know that Russian military, that thing that we're spending 8% of our GDP to do? And you know the 3 years we've spent degrading the Ukrainian military? None of that worked. None of that worked. They were they were taking our territory and we could not stop them. And so that's why we deployed these tactical nuclear weapons. And in the process, we obliterated an entire Russian town. We obliterated, again, a large number of Russian forces. Because, again, this would eliminate the entire line of contact. It's not very useful. Now, where they could put it would be somewhere like in maybe some sort of Ukrainian supply or logistics hub. But that too isn't going to be decisive, because what it's going to take out is a lot of logistics, but not actually going to eliminate that many maneuver units. And as a result, right, you could just go around, and individual tactical warehouses and supply depots are not decisive. Because again, and if Russia could hit them, like their supplies, their munitions, they don't need. If a thermobaric rocket or a fab or a large explosive won't cook it off, then what's this going to do? Do you see what I mean? So is this worth? Is the tactical gain worth whatever this is? By the way, we can step it up and see what it would be if Russia used one of the largest strategic weapons in its arsenal. And you can see here that while bad, it is not actually like a game changer level event, right? There's kind of your heavy blast damage radius. So just some stuff to think about. Again, that it's a real fear. I'm not going to sit there and be like it's not possible. But what it is very, very, a very desperate course of action, one that appears so desperate that it may not, and while it would be effective in some ways, it wouldn't be so effective that it would be an instant win, and it would cost politically Putin so much more than it's worth. Anyway, guys, that's all I had. Hope you got some interesting insights here. A huge thank you to our Colonel tier members, particularly James Sterling, Steve Moran, Doug Beck, Alan Knudsen, Bastian Himmerling, Yanko Georgiev, as well as all of our Lieutenant tier members. Could not do this without you guys. Check us out, combatvetnews.com, and of course, subscribe to the channel and like the video. That makes a difference. I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.